So, Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of the Islamophobia Files, where we unpack the structures, narratives, and power relations that shape Islamophobia around the world. I'm your host, Dr. Hatem Ghazian, and today we're diving into how Islamophobia operates across borders from the UK to the United States, and how communities continue to resist, challenge, and reimagine belonging in the face of systemic racism. Join me today are two remarkable guests whose scholarship and activism have transformed our understanding of Islamophobia and its intersections with race, gender, and empire. Dr. Peter Hopkins, professor of social geography at Newcastle University, whose extensive research explores racism, Islamophobia, and experiences of young Muslims in Britain. Welcome, Peter. Good to have you with us.
Nice to see you.
Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi, associate professor of ethnic studies and founding director of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies (AMID) program at San Francisco State University, whose work links Palestinian liberation, feminism, and anti-racist struggle globally, as well as constantly having the open classroom as an environment to actually bring education from the classroom to the general public. Together, we will examine how Islamophobia functions not only as an individual prejudice, but as a structural and geographical system connecting policies, media representation, and academic institutions. So welcome, it's great to have you. So let's really delve into the discussion. Maybe how do each one of you conceptualize not just Islamophobia, not just as prejudice, but as a structure embedded in power, policy, and empire. So in your research, because often we think of Islamophobia in an individual level, or at least that's how we get it reported, but how to think of it in terms of structure that is embedded in policy, empire, and power. So maybe if you start with Rabab, you could start us with that question, then we'll take Peter as well.
Yeah, I think thank you so much for having us, Hatem. It's really good to be here. And of course, as you always, I want to acknowledge that we are convening on indigenous stolen people's land. And actually, it's very appropriate because today is indigenous people's land. And we always say, why is there one day indigenous people's land? It's in the US, it's usually quote unquote Columbus Day, which we know there is so many myths around it and fabrications, but that's part of the history that we have to contend with. And I think that's in the sense that's why it's really important to think of Islamophobia as a structural embedded in all aspects of life. And it is especially within the Western world, we say, but it also has spilled over in all our lives everywhere because the way knowledge functions, knowledge works, English and French, let's say, and Spanish are universal languages now, and English is a dominant language. So all the production of knowledge that we get into also spills over, and the knowledge that's produced in English takes dominance over any kind of knowledge that's produced anywhere else. So if we think about Arabic, for example, and the ways in which studies of Arabic during the Islamic state, during, let's say, Andalusia and so on, a lot of it was very useful in translating Western knowledges and production from Greece, from Rome, and so on. It's completely erased where it came from, how it happened, and so on. That is not accidental. This is also part of how credit is given to certain folks and so on. For the U.S., let's say the U.S. even settler colonialism did not just come by itself as a number of people who are escaping from their horrible conditions trying to find anywhere else, but and which is very similar narrative to how Israel was established as a settler colony. But it's also, if they had not been able to have the facilities to move from one place to the other, they would not have been able to. So with it itself, there is the question of genocide that was very much part and parcel. It's a structural issue as well. And with that, there is also the historical, the ideological, the think way of bringing it together. So when we see that when the settler colonialism moved from one place to the other, from Europe, let's say, to the Western Hemisphere, with it came Islamophobia, which is very much embedded in the thought and in the thought of thinking of Muslim people, Arab people, as being less than, as Fanon said, in the zone of non-being, okay, less than, constantly. So there is the white supremacy, as in Palestine, we think of Zionism as a Jewish supremacy, thinking about the people are not worth anything, and therefore killing them, not thinking of the numbers and so on, doesn't mean anything. Also, their religion, their thoughts, their practices, and so on, and lesser than, and also as heathen. And so it is even the whole debate in the Spanish monarchy in the 15th century. Do here in the US, do Indians, okay, indigenous people, do they even have a soul? And can they be killed or not if they don't convert to Christianity? So all of this, and this, we're not talking about the debate but between a couple of people saying that this is prejudice or not. This is much deeper, that if they if they have a soul, are we able to convert them? Because if they
Mm.
don't have a soul, then they don't exist. I mean, so this is in itself, it's a material condition to genocide people and take over anything they want. And this gets inherited from one generation to another, from one state formation to the other, from state rules, laws, and so on and so forth, until we get to the day that it is publicly spoken of, and talked about in the highest echelons of government without any apologies. Even if we think about post 9/11 2001, when Islamophobia heightened a lot. It's not that it didn't exist before. It was heightened a lot, to the point that other people other than us began to
Mm.
notice it. We knew it was there. We saw it. We feel it. We test it. We all the time, whether it is smaller or bigger issues. Now there is no apologies. Now it's part of life. It's so normalized as part and parcel in the laws, in the behavior, in the practices, and everything. And then people say, "Oh, this is really bad," and move on with it. And it's not even shocked. As so, I think this is very much part and parcel in every aspect of life, in gender, in sexuality, in racism, everywhere. And we can start talking about, break this apart and talk about different components of it.
Oh, thank you, Rabab. Peter, I know that you have done extensive research, and your recent publication, Everyday Islamophobia, that focuses on the experiences of Muslims and so on. So take us from your lens and from your area of specialization, because when you talk about people thinking of geography, they only think of a map, right? And maybe also introduce us to really some of the groundbreaking work in the field of geography that looks at space, at areas of inclusion, exclusion, where people feel safe and not safe, and how everyday Islamophobia actually gets to be experienced on an individual level.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for that, Hatem. Yeah, I think it's really important that one of the things that drove me to write the book is that when I hear people talk about everyday Islamophobia, they tend to say, "Oh, yeah, it was an unfortunate encounter at the bus stop, or somebody in a shop said something, or they were in the city centre and something happened," and it's almost like just this individual encounter that was a bit unfortunate. And sometimes they say, "Oh, the person wasn't very well educated," or they're angry, or they're on drugs, or they're drunk, or they've been drinking, that type of thing. And whereas the way I see it is there's a whole set of structures that are supporting Islamophobia on an everyday way, and the ways that people experience everyday Islamophobia is down to what I call in the book the Islamophobia industrial complex. So this is a set. It's a bit like an extension of Nathan Lean's really great book on the Islamophobia industry. So there's a set of agents that are part of this industrial complex. And we know that there's other industrial complexes like the terror industrial complex and the military industrial complex. So I think there's an Islamophobia industrial complex. There's politicians that make loads of money out of it. There's far-right activists who make money out of writing blog posts and keeping websites running and just producing this stuff, and they're paid lots of money to do so. Newspapers, media outlets, the whole range of different people. Unfortunately, there's also academics, public intellectuals who are quite right-wing, who think they're being clever and sort of mainstreaming quite right-wing ideas that they think there's a public interest in, and actually I don't think there is. But in doing that, they get a profile and they end up selling books to mainstream audiences. So there's a whole to me, there's a whole structure there that's operating that supports and informs people that, so when you end up having an unfortunate encounter at the bus stop or on the train, it's not just one person. That person's been informed by this industrial complex. So in terms of my background, so I'm a social geographer, and I'm almost a sociologist. In a sense, there's a lot of overlaps there, and social geography is quite an interdisciplinary area. But essentially, we look to issues of everyday geography as a way to think through how things operate. And so, of course, that could be about the body or the home, the family and the community, the neighbourhood. It could be about everyday mobility or urban and regional issues, rural places, national issues, citizenship, right up to the global and the transnational. So geographers tend to look across all those different levels. We tend to call them scales, but I don't often use that because people think the scale's what you use in the kitchen to weigh when you're cooking food or whatever. But that's basically, I think, what a lot of geographers bring. But something that I find really interesting about Islamophobia studies is that it is really interdisciplinary, and it's got this richness of people coming from, ethnic and racial studies, studies of immigration. There's political scientists and people studying terrorism, right through to anthropologists, social geographers, and and it makes it a really rich and exciting field to be a part of.
Right. Now, maybe in the current period, we're seeing people actually expressing not only Islamophobia but racism openly. And it's interesting, in some of the research, we see that actually people are beginning to exhibit or at least attack Muslims as well as minorities in some of the most visible and public spaces. So what is taking place in relations to the larger discourse of empire or state and the decisive shift on a state level on embracing extreme right-wing politics and policies, and how that gets to be expressed, whether it's Muslims, immigrants, and so on. I know we see it here in the US, but also in the UK, in France, this rising tide, which I see it as almost a reversing back to some of the taboos about overt racism, and now using Islamophobia as a way to come back and express it publicly. So have your work documented some of those instances and experiences?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Peter, and then we'll come back to.
Go ahead, Peter. That's fine. I'll go next. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, for me, I think, and I mentioned this in the book. For me, certainly in the UK, but I think it's happening in lots of places. There's been a mainstreaming of very right-wing issues. And it's almost, and a lot of mainstream politicians are doing this, and the media are doing it as well. So, I mean, and by mainstream, I mean the sort of the big political parties and not the really right-wing ones. So both in the UK, some people would say the Conservatives are really right-wing. They're, they're quite often in government, and they're a bit more mainstream than say, at the moment, Reform. But what's happened is, some of these mainstream parties are making immigration the key issue. So when Rishi Sunak stood to be re-elected as Prime Minister, he stood on a platform and the only thing it said was stop the votes. It wasn't anything about healthcare or education or transport or childcare or any university funding. It wasn't any of the other things that people think are important. And it basically meant that was the main issue that people thought was happening in the UK. And it's simply not the case. Right? But this is what's happened across the board. And then you see it in the newspapers. Oh, stop the boats. Oh, there's too many immigrants. We've been flooded. Oh, there's an invasion. And you get all this sort of messaging. And I think it's happening in lots of places. It's happening in Australia. I think it's happening in the US as well. And it's became okay now to talk about these things. And then added to that, there's a sort of an argument, and you see this amongst certain public intellectuals who basically, argue that, the public are wanting to have a debate about immigration. It's like, no, they're not. The public want to debate hospital waiting lists and school places and transport costs and the living wage and how much they're getting paid and how much tax they're paying and all these sorts of things. I don't think they want to really have a debate about immigration, or certainly if they do, it's not the main issue. So I think there's been a mainstreaming of these, and it's now became a sense that this is what people want to talk about, and I don't think they do. And that's the fault of like the media and politicians in doing that.
Yeah. And Rabab?
Yeah, I think there is several things that we can talk about, and I don't think the U.S. is exactly the same situation as Europe. Let's talk about several things. I mean, with the Europe, for example, there is this whole crisis, so-called crisis about immigration and so on. When there is very low birth rate in Europe, there isn't people who actually do the work, and so that's in itself, it's a very big contradiction, because who is going to do the work in order for Europe to even maintain? But there is, we know that there is big part of the income and so on coming from continuous neocolonialism, which, even though some of the classical colonialism is gone, but there is still neocolonialism and the exploitation of multiple multinationals wreaking havoc throughout the third world and so on. But also, who is going to be taking care of the various industries and so on? So that's one thing. Then secondly, the immigrants are let's say immigrants from multiple third world countries, and I will say Muslims, Africans, Muslims who could be also Africans. They are from also Caribbean countries and so on and so forth. Why they are there? I mean, they ended up there because of the colonialism. This is kind of like also an effect of quote unquote post colonialism. The other thing that's very interesting is that this whole, as I talked before about this white European supremacy, the colonialism that looks down upon people that they, and it's very interesting because it's very contradictory to the history. When we talk about, go back to the history and think about the European Renaissance. When did European Renaissance began to appear as when there was the defeat of the Andalusian, caliphate, the rule of Arabs and Muslims in Andalusia. That's when it comes, and all of a sudden now, when we read the history, it's as if it happened all by itself. No connection to to all the legacies that are throughout the Mediterranean. If you go through the northern Mediterranean, you will see all of it. And now there is some kind of revision of history and thinking about, oh, what is this going on for many years? For example, in Spain, there was complete amnesia, collective amnesia, and intentional amnesia. So now there is a new generation of scholars that are thinking about questions of justice, questions of also knowledge, like thinking about what knowledge is, what existed and what didn't exist. So they're talking about it, and there are people who were conversos, who were converted. There were people who were imposed upon them to be converted and so on. We always hear about the Inquisition against the Jews, but we don't hear about the Inquisition against Muslims. So there is all of this knowledge that's coming about as a result of people recognizing justice, and justice becoming the sort of the compass that brings people together. So this is one thing. The other thing that's very interesting about the discourse of the right wing, and this is the right wing more in Europe, but it's also part of the alt-right in the US as well. They were adopting a lot the whole replacement theory about specifically about the Jews. Jews will not replace us. But actually now the replacement theory is applied more and more against Muslims and dark skin, black and brown immigrants, and many of them might be Muslim, might not be Muslims. But actually it is very interesting, because if you see the rhetoric and so on, a lot of it targets dark skin as well as Muslims, because also Islam is a religion non-European, non-colonial. This comes from another place that contrasts very contradiction with the Christianity, and Christianity has a lot to do with colonialism, with the colonial mission, and so on and so forth. So this is something that they are very much embedded. This is part of the title of the podcast, very much embedded with each other. So we see that. I mean, this is the whole replacement. Maybe they don't pay, not all of them, the philosophers understand it, the leaders understand it. The choice of the words that people say are not accidental. Leaders, political leaders, and so on, count every single word they say. When they say it, there is a lot about replacement theory that is not applied to Jews, that specifically applied to Muslims, Arabs, dark skin, black people, and so on. And it's actually chosen specifically, and sometimes it's not even covert. It's very overt and specifically targeting, and it fits the interest, the structural, the material interests, not only the ideological. They need the ideological in order to mobilize the populations, in order to egg them on, and actually also all of it feed into each other, because the population, when there were questions about colonialism, and several populations were actually beginning to see that there are problems with colonialism, and they would like to retreat from it. Part of it because it's not beneficial, but part of it also because they were seeing that there is something wrong with it. At one time, colonialism was a very nice word, and then it became a very dirty word. So they were trying to think it. So then you have to also convince the population, raise their consciousness about how do you make this happen, and then you would find another target. So now you are targeting Muslims, Arabs, black and brown people, putting it together, all of it together. So you have to bring in racism, you have to bring in Islamophobia, you have to bring Orientalism, and then you also have to bring in one of the centrist things now today, questions of Palestine. So you have to also construct all of them together, and they all apply to Palestine. They all apply to the Palestinian cause and supporters of Palestine, not only because it is like a property of the Palestinians, but because it is cause about justice. To call it all together and make it the centrist enemy, the evil enemy there, that we can actually, like, whether you are Christian, where you talk about Christianity as a mission. I'm not talking about the Christians in Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and Palestinian Christians, and Christians who are really applying the mission of Christ, which was always about justice. I'm talking about Christianity as an industry, as a big structural factor to continue colonization. So this becomes very interesting, and you compare the replacement theory and what's happening. And then the massive let's say ways to attack and kill and pillage in the United States is very interesting, because we're talking about a settler colony. You're talking about those who set up the United States on a land that doesn't belong to them, and then you hear the president and the secretary of various secretaries of war, of state, and so on, acting as if they are being occupied at the land that doesn't belong to them by other people, and then feeling sorry for the settlers from South Africa, and defining them as a protected category. It's insane. I mean, really, if you think about it, people really need to think about, connect all the dots and say, what is going on here, and how is it that this presentation that doesn't really work well. I'm thinking about the presentation as if you're doing a slideshow, marketing something or whatever. Something doesn't really add up, but they bring it all together and they make this package together to present it, and they draw on all the things that attract racist, supremacists, the 1%, that for them it actually really makes sense. And because they say, we don't want to pay more taxes, we don't want to have the children of these people who are immigrated to our country be studying healthcare and so on. So all of it also we don't want to give them anything. We want to keep everything to ourselves. Why? Because they don't deserve it. They're lesser than us. They are not worshiping God. They are terrorists. They're bloodthirsty, and so on. So all of it fits into each other. And you start thinking, where did it begin? What's the egg and what's the chicken? And if we start thinking that it's one before the other, I think it would be very mistaken not to think about them all as a very connected system, that one aspect of it leads to the other, and actually really confront them in the same way. And I want to just add one thing, that during the flood, just one, I want to give an example of the Sumud flotilla and the ways in which the many of the women were muhajjabat, and many of them testified that they took off their hijabs and also took off their clothes. And when they saw sisters who had mastectomies because they had breast cancer, they started laughing at them, and they wouldn't give them their hijabs back and clothes to cover. They took everybody's clothes, but it was specific to the Muslim women there, and it was not really analyzed sufficiently of what's going on here. It was so normalized. So I think this is also another part of the equation.
Now, maybe from your discussions, both conversation, is to really move to academia and the politics of knowledge and the production of knowledge, and how the university itself is actually embedded. Both of you have faced or studied institutional resistance in academia when it comes to discussing Islamophobia. Definitely now Palestine is just, you cannot speak of Palestine, or at least do research or anti-imperialism. You could actually, books are being banned, classes are being canceled, students' names, faculty, staff are being handed. So what does this tell us about the politics of knowledge production? And what does that tell us about the university as an institution that have often wore the mantle of critical studies and exploring and seeking, small letter T truth, where actually we are seeing, and the university itself is being exposed, that it's not really the pursuit of knowledge that is being at the forefront, but a whole host of other reproduction of the system. So how do we understand the role of the university and knowledge production? Peter?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's really tricky for, certainly in the UK, for universities, because we've got the prevent policy, which is the terrorism policy in the UK. I mean, what's really interesting about policies like that is how they've travelled. So that policy's been used in different places and been copied. So it's like been copied. China copied it and used it in terms of how they've treated the Uyghur migrants and justified internment and like forced re-education camps and all this sort of stuff. So it's interesting how that's, it's travelled, even though it's not really that useful. But the problem, certainly in the UK, is that all universities have to show that they comply with it. And it's not just universities, it's all other institutions. So I've been in like meetings with the Scottish Government, with their education team, and the person who's in charge of Prevent comes into the meeting, and you're kind of like, oh, I wonder what you're doing here. And it's because we're talking about Islamophobia. They're kind of coming in to check up on what's happening and see what's happening, because they need to make
sure. They come and attend the actual meeting, faculty meeting.
Yeah.
And so, what do they ask? What do they look at?
Well, it's more a monitoring thing. So one of the previous places I worked at, the person who was in charge of the Prevent policy added themselves to the mailing list of the Student Islamic Society, and they weren't on any other student societies. But it's almost like they're just kind of it's a strategy of surveillance. Is to keep an eye on these potentially problematic Muslim students, who might be radicalized and might be up to no good. And there's been government policies produced, and what to look for. If there's students with brown skin who are carrying a big rucksack, speaking a different language, and they're hanging around in large groups, then you might need to keep an eye on them. It's that sort of thing, and it's encouraged this sort of surveillance culture where you need to keep an eye on people and watch what's going on. I mean, there's the case of Rizwan Sabir, who accessed a freely available Al Qaeda training manual, right, that he was going to study as part of his dissertation, and he sent it to his friend, and who printed it off, and somebody saw it on his computer, and they were in. There was a whole police operation monitoring what they were doing, and and he was arrested, and his book's amazing. I would definitely read his book if you've not. But that's the kind of thing that happens. So these people come along, and and they'll think they're just doing their job because they have to, and the universities have to show that they comply with this. So like all universities have to have there's a sort of system for invited speakers. So if you attend a UK university, they should have a system for how they monitor who's speaking at, say, lectures or like seminar series or whatever, and you have to check who they are, and so it's just a form of surveillance. I've not heard of somebody being banned or blocked, but it does happen. So it's this, and it's to do with the relationship of the state with the universities in the UK. They're kind of intermeshed, and the Prevent strategy has meant that, and it's not just universities, like I say, it's hospitals, it's schools, any kind of big institution like that have to have this approach, and if anything happens, the Prevent officer or whoever it is that's allocated the role of this comes in and kind of checks on what's going on. But what's interesting is the other side of that is that there is the whole discourse of academic freedom. You can
Mm.
research whatever topics you want. If you want to apply for funding in a topic, nobody tells me what to write or what to apply for funding for or what a PhD student should research. It's kind of up to me. And if I can publish a book and get it accepted, or an article and get accepted, it's fine. So there's a bit of a tightrope between the whole prevent surveillance structure and the relationship of the universities with the state. And the other side, there's the academic freedom. You can do what you want. And where I've tried to exploit that is certainly in the UK in about the last 10 years or so. There's been a big push about research impact. And they want to see academics generating impact beyond the academy for the benefit of society and the economy and whatever. So I've done a lot of work with, I helped set up a cross-party group on tackling Islamophobia in the Scottish Parliament, and I worked with members of the Scottish Parliament to do that, and I got funding to do that and to do a report, and so I kind of exploited that in a sense, because I saw that as an opportunity to do that work, and I've written about that as well. So that there are pros and cons. Let's just say there is a big surveillance issue, but there are opportunities that people interested in Islamophobia can exploit to do more work like that.
And Rabab, your history and entanglement, not by choice, but by a structural entanglement that really has created almost a total siege. We say that Gaza is under total siege. Ahmed program at SFSU has been under siege since almost day one. So
Yes.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think, let's talk first before Ahmed. I think that the structural issue, the big issue is that the university itself is not a neutral partner. And the university has, historically, there has been much encouragement to produce knowledge, to ask a lot of questions, to not have a ceiling on the kind of question you pose, on critical thinking, encouraging critical thinking. But we are seeing more and more and more a limit to what you can ask. Even asking questions now, you can be penalized for asking specific questions, for doing specific kind of research, for saying specific things. So that in itself, we are talking about what does this really mean for the system itself and for the ability to create knowledge in particular context. And I think if we the whole analysis and comparative analysis between what has happened within Nazism, within fascism, what happened in Franco's, in Mussolini, what is going on here, and what does it mean when books are banned? When people are actually, there are limits on what you can think, and you can think, and then what are limits when you are supposed to spy and become a snitch on your colleagues and your students. And I've experienced that, including even asking my students behind my back to spy on me, and egging them to actually complain about me, and telling them how they can go to ask for grace to be changed and so on. It's all of it in order to undermine Ahmed and basically break down the program, to destroy the program, because it is no longer convenient for the university itself. Not only their Zionist allies, it's no longer convenient for the university itself for this program to continue as an independent program standing on its own. Because the Zionists are targeting us and really don't want us to have the program, because they would like to criminalize Palestine, and they'd like to remove Palestine completely from the curriculum, because Palestine now is institutionalized in the curriculum. And once it's institutionalized, and we have a minor, and we've been wanting to have a major for a very long time, but they are chipping away at the minor itself. That's really a problem for the Zionists, because it is part of the classes students can take, and they can graduate and study, and the classes are full. I'm only one professor and another professor that can call themselves Ahmed, but their actual appointment is not Ahmed. And we're really trying the best to do that. When you talk about this, when you're talking about shutting down everything, we're really talking about fascism. We're talking about new McCarthyism, that the university itself would like to take our whatever assets we have. We have the courses, we have the Edward Said Scholarship, we have the agreement with An-Najah National University, we have brilliant students that go on and do excellent in the PhD, we have very, very attractive open classrooms and so on. They would like to take it all, but they'd like to control it, so it is no longer a program that defines itself as justice center, that is specialized in Arab and Muslim communities, not Middle East, an area defined by colonial narratives and so on, and that doesn't shy away from talking about any topic. Every topic is open for discussion. So that in itself had to do with the structure of the university, as the universities are cutting down on all ideas, and that the universities are going up to the program of the government that's shipping away funds, departments, cutting down universities, threatening them, and many universities are going along. And now we know that the two big sections in California, University of California, as well as California State Universities, they handed over the names. I know in our university, California State University, they handed over the names to the government of faculty and students who might be suspected of organizing for Palestine. They come up with this basically fabrication that we might be anti-Semitism because we advocate for Palestine, and hand names, emails, phone numbers, and so on. And in my case, and the case of the Ahmed Studies program, we already have been exonerated multiple times in investigations that should not have happened anyway, again, including a federal lawsuit that they filed against us, and we defeated them big time. The judge dismissed with prejudice, and the judge said, even in the lawsuit, that just because she's anti-Zionist and supports Palestinian resistance does not make her anti-Semitic. It doesn't mean it for the Zionists and for allies, including at the university, it doesn't mean anything. They're going to keep coming again and again and again with it. Part of it is to smear and slander your reputation. It undermines your academic reputation and makes it impossible for you to do work, because it takes so much time. This kind of really takes so much time, and you have to decide: are you going to be fighting this in order for you to maintain and keep what you have, which is a very important program that you cannot give it up, or you're going to be focusing, for example, on the studying around Gaza, all the universities that has been destroyed, all the places for the construction of knowledge for a whole population, or you're only going to defend. What are you going to do? And you can. There is no choice. It's absolute choice. So then, that at the same time, they continue doing this again and again. If they don't do this, they will send you very, very derogatory, very offensive messages and so on. And the university, it happened to me. It happened to me this past week. It happened to me back in 2019, a letter that was sent to the university mail, and the university ruled that this is not a threat. And the whole letter is a threat, and it has and says, watch it, don't cross the street, don't engage in arguments, and so on. You never know. And the university deemed it that it is not really a threat. There is nothing in it as a threat. And similar letter was sent to Ilhan Omar, and it was investigated to the point that they found the person, and they hold the person accountable. So all of this stuff is happening, and it's not just happening to me, because we know that graduate students have been picked up by ICE and have been put in jail, like Mahmoud Khalil, when his own child was getting born. I mean, the stuff that is, and it's completely ridiculous, because there is no foundation to do this. And we see higher echelons of government saying this. And I think it's really important for us to say, is this fascism? And if this is fascism, what does this really mean about the production of knowledge? And then if you add the other layer, not only about the university itself as an institution of knowledge, it's becoming an institution of the police state. Then you add to it and you say, so what are we supposed to do? And then when you add Islamophobia and you think about constantly, people are, Islamophobes, and the whole Islamophobia institution claims that there is no knowledge production. And then when you go from the Kutab to the knowledge, to the Prophet saying to seek knowledge even in China, I mean, everything, there is knowledge constantly, including kids in Gaza, with the mentors and so on, trying to teach them anywhere. During the Intifada 87, when the Israelis shut off the schools, they were trying to they teaching them, even mothers and anybody who's available, teach them in gardens and so on. There is always this, and this is, we are told that Arab Muslim societies do not teach. They try to make everybody ignorant, and also part of it also is the sexism, the misogyny that's involved with it, that also has Orientalism part of it, and this whole thing, the construction of us as uncivilized, We are the uncivilized, and it's sort of normalized as well, that the women are ignorant, they don't do this, and the men are bloodthirsty, nasty, misogynist, excessively misogynist, homophobic. All of it is a package deal. That's what I've been saying. And the universities, the problem is that the universities advance this. So when I look, and even taking our courses, like I have a course, they took it away from me. This is all retaliation, and they gave it to a faculty member who knows nothing about our communities, nothing, no expertise, no qualification, all of it in order to undermine Ahmed. So you see it coming from all sort of, some of it on the micro level, some of it on the macro level, and it's a very, very hard battle to fight. But we're not going to stop. We're going to continue fighting it.
Thank you. This is really a good segue into the next question, specifically on that the university almost have perfected performative inclusion. And I see it at at Berkeley, at other places, where images are placed in the advertisement, in the marketing, offering certain goodies here and there, saying we're going to offer a halal option at the cafeteria, maybe try to celebrate certain elements. And so there's a lot of performative inclusion. So how can we begin to address this performative inclusion and actually think, is the university capable to actually arrive at genuine transformation in addressing systematic Islamophobia, in opening the spaces, both not only for research, but actually pushback to the prevailing almost every day Islamophobia and everywhere Islamophobia, where this performative inclusion becomes also part of the problem, because it gives the perception that we actually are challenging Islamophobia. So Peter, do you see this? Have you seen this in your research and in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky. I don't know if it would be possible for a university to really fully do that. I think one of the issues is all of these sorts of topics around. I mean, we call it EDI. I think in the US it's DEI or JEDI. It's called different things. Things like that. They kind of come in now and then they get cut. They're quite an easy thing for universities to cut if there's a budget issue, and we want to save some funding. It's let's cut the person that works on equalities issues, and then some of the work to achieve gender equality or whatever kind of gets marginalized or sidelined. So I mean, I had an interesting experience. I was the first person that was made the Dean of Social Justice in Newcastle, and towards the end of it was a 3-year post initially. I was assuming it was going to continue, but I got told that it was stopping, and that it was just a short-term thing, and that social justice was fully embedded, is what I was told. That's the actual words that I was told by the person I reported to. And I just thought, how not embedded social justice? That makes it sound like it's been achieved. But it was all, so for me, it's a leadership issue. The only way that these things would really happen and really is really strong leadership and vision from the top. And the problem is that in a lot of universities, the leadership changes a lot, and new people come in. And if there's a problem, the provost or whoever's in charge, gets moved out, and a new person comes in with a new vision, and they want to change things or have a restructure or cut a program or merge departments or whatever. And so having that long term, because this is a big issue. It's not just like, let's bring somebody in and we'll sort out Islamophobia or we'll deal with gender equality. It has to be a long term thing, and that's where I think it's really. I almost think it's impossible. I don't know if I have to get the hope that a university could actually achieve that. And I do think it is performative. It's like, let's have a nice website that talks about addressing racism or addressing gender equality, and they have like there was one piece that talks about ornamental intersectionality, where you get your crest for gender equality and it goes up on your website. But it doesn't mean that you're treating women academics well, or that the women are getting promoted, or that women are getting valued. It's like a badge that you put on your website, and you pat yourself in the back, and then you go back and reproduce a sort of masculinist institution. And I think that's the same. I mean, I know I'm not aware of there being a system of sort of accrediting anti-Islamophobia work like that. But even if there was, I mean, some of the race equality charters are a bit like that. You say that you're addressing race equality and you get your badge and you put it on your website, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing it. And Sarah Ahmed's written really well about that in her work. So I'm not very hopeful that that would be possible in an institution, personally.
Rubab?
Yeah, I will just add maybe 3 points. One is that this is like adding color or adding Islam and stir, and just basically just going through the points. Because one thing is to say, first of all, let's look at who is in charge, who is leading this. And I'm not saying only look at the faces, the race, and so on, because that's not enough. Because you could always find many people of Muslims, many people of color, and so on. But you need to also say what are they doing with their lives? Who do they represent? When a president of a university like ours, the institution is firing lecturers, for example, en masse, and hiring a lot of administrators. So new hires, faculty are not belonging to the union, but are only owing their livelihood to the administrators that hire them. So they, of course, they're going to toe the line, and raising their salaries and say we are in austerity. Their salaries are raised 10%. So if you are in austerity, why are you getting raised? And then at the same time, also there are no policies. So they, for example, start a center for Black unity, and then they fire the director because the center is working with the students and working with the community to really do the things that the community and the students and the faculty want to do, because it doesn't toe the line of what the administration needs to do to make sure that discipline is carried out the way the university wants it, and the university as a police institution wants it to be done. And because quote unquote chaos might start, and the goal is to keep things contained. And when things are contested, and we know now in the United States, public space is contested. It is not everything is hunky-dory, and there is problems despite all the punishment that's going on. They are unable to control public space. People are up in arms, literally almost, about it. And although now the ones who are really carrying violence are the right wing within it and so on. But there is protest and going. So when you are doing this, you're giving me all this performance, so it doesn't work. And I've heard it many times from the strikers of 1968 who led the student strike, and they refused to even go take pictures with the plaque. They said, I'm not going to come for a photo opportunity. I refuse to do that. You are using our name in order to keep promoting this university, market it as, the place for radicalism and so on. But everything you are doing is against that. It is a neoliberal model that you are pushing all of this stuff, disciplining everybody, punishing students, punishing faculty, making every time, even one time the student said, I'm advertising something about Palestine. So the dean sent me an email saying, a student said that, and I'm telling you that you will defend your right as long as you stick with the goals of your class. I'm like, what? What is this? Is not about academic freedom. I'm not even going to bother with that. Okay, everything is part of Palestine teaching. Everything is Ahmed teaching. And this is always, you remove this from your Facebook, do this and so on. So there is so much suppression happening. All of this time, place, and manner, all these mechanisms that are doing, these are not a way to actually allow students on campus to create social movements, to grow, to realize themselves in these 4 years that they go to college, learn things. They want to produce students as docile citizens. So when they graduate, they toe the line and they recreate the same unjust system, uphold the status quo that there is. So it's really, this is, and Islamophobia is, of course, part and parcel of it. And we know it on our campus when young women in the Muslim Student Association come and say, they bothered me because I'm wearing a hijab. They make cracks at me and so on. University police and the administration, don't worry about it. It's not really a big deal. What do you mean it's not a big deal? I mean, so the students don't go and complain. And this is why the complaints, let's say, from Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians are not really high number, because they don't trust the system. They don't trust the system, and we don't. And I've used to create a lot of complaints, but it's a waste of time. You fill up way paper, and this is also, if you want to talk about the knowledge, and you want to talk. I mean, Peter is also sociologist. I don't know if you do statistics, but I'm also a sociologist, and I don't really I don't think the numbers always tell. You add the numbers and so on, but they're not telling, because many of us don't have the time and waste the time and give more information about ourselves to provide more surveillance, and it doesn't go anywhere. Nothing happens. So there is the institutions themselves are actually part and parcel to, let's say, quote unquote, beef up the system of the
Mm.
state and strengthen surveillance and strengthen these powers, rather than allow it to be a place for the creation of knowledge, for learning about things. So it's quite repressive.
Now, let me, I said last week, the university administration and institution think of Arab Muslims, Palestinians, that they really should belong in Guantanamo Bay. And the fact that we are tolerating you to be here, you should be thankful, and not to actually speak and
Out
engage,
of line,
because
out of line.
you should stick to the fact that we are taking you out of the Guantanamo Bay type of what you call framework, and we're tolerating you in here, and you should actually be thankful and gratitude and walk the straight line in the campus. So don't think that you're in here almost equal or having any standing. So that gets me into going into the notion of intersectionality and resistance, and how communities are responding. Peter, you have studied the lived experiences of young Muslims navigating identity and belonging challenges that they are facing. What forms of resilience, resistance have you witnessed in these communities, and how resourceful are they in actually living in such an atmosphere that challenges who they are, almost at the core level?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great question, because I mean, I see lots of examples of resistance and resilience, and they're almost quite strategic. So I've done quite a lot of research. Qualitative interviews with young Muslims tend to be like high school age, university age students, of a whole range of different backgrounds. Some of them are refugees. In Scotland, a lot of them are like Scottish Pakistani heritage Muslims, but they sound like me and they've got a Scottish accent and they were born in Scotland. And it was so interesting how the strategies that they developed to respond to the ways in which they're sort of, they experience everyday Islamophobia and they're marginalised in an everyday way. I mean, some of the strategies I like the best are sort of the using humour. So quite a lot of the kind of university age guys would almost, just make it into a joke to diffuse the situation. And I think you need to be quite clever to do that. It's not like, and it's not to make light of the situation. They knew what was going on and they didn't like it, and they knew they were being sort of securitized in a lot of cases. But they would use humour. So like there was one guy we interviewed, and and he said quite often he would carry a big bag with him, and he had his like gym kit and these books in it from university and whatever. And some people would say, "Oh, have you got a bomb in your bag?" And he would just say, "Oh yeah, you better watch it. I'll put it under your seat." Haha, and just kind of walk off. And so he would use humour as a way to diffuse situations. There's quite a lot of examples like that. A lot of people would do what I call managing multicultural intimacies. So they would almost be hyper sensitized to, if they were on a bus or on a train, they would be quite aware that, of who was around and what was happening. And they would kind of make extra efforts to smile at people and let people go first, and, let people go first onto the bus and offer their seat and all this sort of stuff. There's quite a lot of things like that as well, including mobility strategies in terms of where they went and where they walked and who they were with. There was a lot of issues around that. And it's interesting that you mentioned intersectionality, because I think it's important also when we think about these issues that we also think about the relationality, because it's also about who else is in the particular places that these young people are in. Because I think there can be a strong relationality in terms of what happens. So interestingly, in Glasgow, I argue anyway that the young Scottish Muslim men, their masculinities were almost developed in relation to the masculinities of the white working class young men that they were at school with, because that was the biggest group at school. And so it was almost, there was a relation between them, and they worked in kind of concert with each other. And that would be quite different if they were growing up somewhere else. So, I mean, that's just some examples, but I've got lots across our research of they developing these sort of strategies of resistance and resilience, and they're quite creative. They would use social media as well in different ways, and follow certain people and engage in certain ways. There's a whole repertoire, I would say, of ways of kind of being, and they were quite playful with it. It wasn't something they took too seriously, which I think is a really powerful strategy. Yes, it upset them sometimes, and it was deeply offensive and very hurtful, but they managed it in quite a light-hearted way, and I think that's how they managed to keep going forward with it.
Rubab, you worked in the intersectional place, brings gender, race, Palestine, in the context of Islamophobia. So how does intersectionality sharpen our understanding of anti-Muslim racism, Islamophobia, and the centrality of, you began to speak about Orientalism, this imagery that Edward Said writes about, Jack Shaheen, but also how really it functions and gets to be focused on specifically on Palestine today, and how is the resilience, resistance, and intersectional work at least pushes back and counter Islamophobia.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to be very, very brief.
No, go ahead. We do. Don't worry.
Okay, we see it. We see it every day. Okay, so by examples, but then I'll talk about the framework. By examples, if we look at what's going on today in Gaza, and we see resilience and resistance in the face of a brutal, killing, devastating, genocidal machine of Zionism that is intentionally starving people, starving babies. It is amazing. I mean, even Palestinians would keep saying how it's amazing how people are resistant, actually still not giving up. They won't give up. They keep standing. And then when you talk about the solidarity movement, you saw the Sumud Flotilla, the global Sumud Flotilla. You see more and more and more boats coming of people from all parts of the world, from people from all backgrounds. You see them passing coffee from ship to ship, and you look at them and you cannot define one particular type. You cannot say these are this, these are this. Everybody, and there is this kind of like, I mean, obviously they don't think the same way. They don't have the same beliefs. They don't have the same religious ideas. They don't have anything. There isn't anything like you can say, oh, this is the type. You can't pinpoint it. You see that they are driven by the idea of justice. I don't really like intersectionality too much per se, as Kimberly Crenshaw described it, because it's like at the intersection. And I think that things are overlapping and complicated with each other. And I'd like to think about justice as the way that people come together. And Palestine today, not because of chauvinistic reasons, I think Palestine is the signifier of justice of the word. And then if Palestine becomes a very narrow thing only for specific people of Palestine, not for everybody around the world, if Palestine becomes like an Islamophobic things, at some point there were something about rejecting Islamist ways of thinking, seeing Palestine. It was problematic. If some people think that, okay, today we liberate Palestine, tomorrow we'll talk about women's liberation, it's problematic. I mean, it's not that Palestinian women will not participate. They have participated again and again because they're not just women. They're also Palestinian. And this is the framework of thinking about you being all sorts of things. You're not just being one thing, and you don't have one single interest. You always have multiple interests. But it is a signifier of justice, and it is have changed Palestinians themselves in the process, but changed Palestinians on the ground, changed Palestinian intellectuals, changed Palestinian political factions, political parties, made people think with each other more, talk to each other more, express the love for each other, become more tolerant of each other, because we see a society that we don't want to be like. We don't want to be like Israel, and we do not want to be like Zionism. That there is it's not just hate individually. It's a structural issue of the genocide, of destruction, of damage, of really, we don't want to be like that. But we also saw that we really need to love love each other, love our communities are really big. Also here, when you talk about people, there is, if you have Islamophobia and so on, it doesn't really work. If you really want to work around Palestine, it doesn't work for the Palestinians. Also, Palestinian resistance movement has also broadened and also become, and this is normal, natural for movements that exist and that survive and move on. For those who want to destroy us, the fascists, the Zionists, genocidals, and so on, actually they're becoming narrower and narrower and narrower. They are big. They're expressing their hate. They're expressing their racism. They're the way they look at all their discourses. They have serious problem with everybody, and the statements they make, take it from the horse's mouth. Take it from all their statements that they want to kill everybody. They want to starve. It's not, they're not even saying they want to, they're doing it. They starve people. They cut water, electricity, medicine, food. I mean, who does that? And I think this is way in which that actually things are so polarized. In one side, you have a party that wants to decide that only salvation is weapons and more weapons and more weapons. And on another side, there is the whole world that wants to have a better life for humanity, wants to come together. And the struggle is really, really hard between the two parties. There is the majority of the world, and there is the 1% again, but it's armed. It has a lot of resources, but at the end of the day, colonized people also end up winning a lot of sacrifices, but they fight because there is convictions. And I think in this sense, around Palestine, around the questions of fighting against Islamophobia, because Islamophobia is also intersects and overlaps racism, intersects and overlaps sexism, intersects and overlaps classism, over exploitation, greed. I mean, all of these things are together in one side, and then you see the people who are coming together and saying, we don't want this word. And the good news also for us is that the younger generations are growing up to be much more just. They're again and again and again voting with their voices, with their feet, with their demonstrations, with their resistance, with their sacrifices, that this is the word we want. And they're becoming much more closer and refusing the colonial borders, refusing the colonial boundaries. And they're saying, we're in it together and we're going to do it together. And I think, so even before people were very pessimistic and so on, and I've always proposed revolutionary optimism, from Fanon to everybody else. And I think we're in it. We're in it. And yeah, people think it's utopian, fine. Maybe they are dreaming. But I think we're in this moment. And I think this is something that is happening. We're going to sacrifice a lot. And we're going to be pressured a lot because powers that be do not want the world to change. They would like to keep it as it is because it's beneficial to them. But we are changing because we have to change, because we want to be free, because we want to have a better world for everybody. And I think that is showing where things are going.
Thank you, Rabab. The last question that I really want to delve into has specifically to deal with the field of Islamophobia studies and to think the areas of new research. What do you see is those gaps that needs to be addressed? New vistas of research, possibly for some of our newly incoming graduate students, individuals that want to do work, which fields, academic fields that have not yet contributed. So can we think about the field of Islamophobia studies, and where do you see some of the critical gaps that needs to be addressed? Peter, since you're just released a book, what are the gaps that you see that you would recommend for people to delve into?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for me, there's a real need to explore. Well, I've called it the Islamophobia industrial complex, but really to explore how all these different agents work, and all these like really far right, and the conspiracy theories that Rubab mentioned, like the Great Replacement, how they are shared online and who's sharing them and who's talking about them, and there's whole networks of people sharing a lot of these things and learning from each other. And it's traveling all around the world to different places, and you see it in Australia, New Zealand, and the US, Canada, Europe. So these things are traveling, and I think it'd be really interesting to look at that and and obviously if it was like a PhD student, you couldn't look at the whole thing. It would need to be quite a focused case study. But you see it in Scandinavia as well. I mean, some of the stuff you read about, the Quran burning in public squares and all this stuff. It's like, where are these people getting these ideas from? And I think it's really hard to research that. It requires really strong research skills to be able to, almost infiltrate some of these networks to find out what's going on and where people are getting their ideas from. Because I think the field is very good at understanding the Muslim experience. I would say is the strength of the field. There's lots of research about, how Muslim communities feel and how they experience Islamophobia and how they respond in different ways and how it marginalises them and the structures of it and all that. So I think it's really strong in that. And then there's the work on how non-Muslims who are mistaken for being Muslim experience it as well. So I think there's a real strength around there. Where there's I think there's less work is the other side, the people that are enacting it. Where are they getting their information from? Are they reading certain newspapers? Are they looking at certain blog sites or social media sites? To me, I think that it could be really interesting to do a lot of work around those issues and for that, I think it would be interesting if there was more people from, say, media and cultural studies and those types of fields coming in. So I think we're good on the sort of sociology and the politics of it, if you like. But there's other fields in there, linguistics. There are other fields there where people have a real skill at analysing language and discourse and how it travels. If that's maybe just one or two ideas there, I mean, I think there's loads of stuff you could do. But those are some ideas that might spark some interest among some members of the community or PhD students wanting to move into this area and develop a career in it.
Rabab, do you have?
Yeah, yes, I do. One, I really think that we should not encourage more and more students to kind of engage in doing research that actually gives money, grants, and so on to advance governments' grants, governments' policies that are Islamophobic. So when Obama was in
The
power,
CVE, the Countering
the
Violent
whole
Extremism
countering kind of
grants.
violent extremism and so on and so forth. I know it's
Yeah.
very tempting, but I think this is very damaging. Two is that I think we really need much more historical research to kind of uncover and make it possible for the world to learn about more and more. I'm not talking about the glorious days and golden days and so on, but there is like a lot of simple things that can actually elaborate things. I also think that we really need to study Islamophobia in so many various places in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and talk about it. It's not just like basically making sort of an advertisement for Islam, but talk about what are the roots, why do people say what they say, and so on. Even if they are very supportive of Palestine, they're very supportive of Muslim people, but you'll see a word coming here, a word coming there. You need to understand why. Maybe taking lived experiences and just and do a lot of lived experiences, studies, and so on. We really need to do that. We do a lot of studies of the West. We do a lot of studies of Europe and the United States. We really need to do much more studies of the third world. There is a lot of support anyway for the causes we work on, but there isn't challenging all these long traditions and long remaining things that we really need to challenge. And we can only challenge them if we understand, figure out where they came from. How do we do that and present them and educate each other and develop the next generation of scholars who are going to be teaching the next generation of scholars?
Yeah.
I think that stuff is a lot of it we're missing.
So just the closing question, what gives you hope in both as an educator, as a person that is engaged? So what gives you hope, and are you overall hopeful, optimistic in the days and months and years ahead? Peter?
I think the thing that keeps me going is I do have a hope that we could eradicate Islamophobia and end racism if people really understood how it worked and what it meant, and the fact that it is all socially and politically constructed and people are making loads of money from it. I think if loads of people actually understood that and learned it, they wouldn't believe in it, they would stop doing it. But it's just that there's this massive industry promoting it and encouraging it, and it's online and it's everywhere you look. So my hope is that if we keep working and the field develops and people we develop, like Rabab's just said, we understand historically how it works, and we'll really look at all those complexities and really, enlighten people to the different ways it operates. My hope is that, we could be a point where, we wouldn't need Islamophobia studies because it wouldn't exist as a thing. It would have disappeared and nobody would be Islamophobic. That's my ultimate sort of hope going forward.
Rabab?
Yeah, for me, resistance, resilience, sumud, the fact that people, no matter how much repression is going on, they're not afraid. People are resisting fascism. The cost is high. People lose their jobs. People get placed in prison. But look, if people in Gaza are able to stay steadfast, they are able to stand against this very nasty genocidal machine. How could we complain? I mean, the least we could do is just contribute a little bit, and we're moving on. They give us inspiration, and we give solidarity and support. And with the two, look, the people in Vietnam lost 3 million people and defeated the largest power on the face of the earth. We take inspiration from the people behind us, and we continue giving in this inspiration for the people ahead of us, and our young generations understand and are not fooled. So we have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope. I don't think I'm over hopeful. I think I'm convinced at my age I'm going to keep fighting. So, and I'm not alone. I have a lot of good company, like the two of you and many others.
Thank you. Deepest gratitude to Dr. Hopkins and Dr. Abdulhadi for sharing your insight, experiences, and courage. Today's conversations remind us that Islamophobia is not a marginal issue, it's a global system of power that we must continue to expose, challenge, and dismantle through solidarity, scholarship, and collective action. Make sure to access Dr. Hopkins and Dr. Abdulhadi's work, and we will make and put links on the podcast so you could access their publications. To our listeners, stay engaged, question dominant narratives, and support the ongoing work of those confronting Islamophobia in all its forms. You have been listening to the Islamophobia Files, where we uncover how fear is manufactured and where truth, resistance, and community come alive. Until next time, I'm Dr. Hatem Badian. Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum.